Hello everyone, welcome to this 2024 React Essentials course. This is a course where I'll walk you through all the essentials of what you need to know in order to build your first React application, build your first portfolio, and then hopefully land your first amazing job. What we'll be focusing on is really the essentials, the necessary, the kind of 80% most important concepts in React, which I highly recommend you to focus on in the beginning, because that's the kind of concepts that will help you build a strong foundation. And then on that foundation, you can go and grow your skills, learn the more advanced concepts, advanced techniques, and so on. But anyways, this course is just focusing on the essentials and aiming to give you a solid foundation that you can then carry on to the next steps. This is my first ever YouTube tutorial, so I really thank you for your patience or whatever. If you decide to stay until the end, I'll more than appreciate your comments. I'm a developer with about 8 years of experience. The positive thing is now I've seen how frameworks like React are used in the industry, in a professional environment, and then I will try to carry on that knowledge to you, and then so I can tell you what's more important, what you need to focus on, and the things that are not really important and are more like the side things that you don't need to focus on that much. And that's how I hope I'll be using my experience to help you throughout this video. The expectations, you don't need to know a lot. I expect you to know a bit of HTML, a bit of CSS, and a bit of JavaScript, just so you know how they look like and what purpose they fulfill and what they do. I don't need you to be good at any of these frameworks, so you don't need to worry about it. If you haven't heard of them, or if you're very beginner, you can just go and look them up for maybe spend a day or two, become familiar with them, so you're more ready to start following on with this tutorial. Now, with all that introduction, we can get started with the concept of what React is. If I show you this page, this is a page from 1996, I guess. This is a website from the old era that was before all these concepts of reactiveness and having interactive websites and web pages. And you can see here, it's all very stale, very, very static. I can click on if I click on any of the links, like this one, for example, it takes me to a different page. And then here, everything is also very fixed and static. I can go back, clicking on something else. You can see if I click around the page, nothing really happens. It's all very static and fixed. And this was the paradigm before the concept of having web pages that will interact with you, something like a mobile app or desktop application. This was from before that era. Now, to compare, we can take a look at a modern website like Airbnb, and here you can see it reacts to it reacts to me interacting with the website. For example, if I zoom out, I did this search to find accommodation in Rome, for example. When I zoom out, all these things change. It reacts to me. If I zoom out again, then again it just re-renders this part based on all the options that are available, and so on. And you can see as I move along, now if I hover this one, it gets highlighted in the map and so on. You see that even though we are on the same page all the time, it's all the page is the same, but the page interacts with us, right? It reacts to us, we can interact with it. And that's basically the concept, the core concept, the core purpose that a framework like React tries to fulfill. This idea that you can have a page that the user can interact with, and that just adds a lot of power, a lot of capability to your pages. You can build very advanced applications like Canva, like Google Docs, I don't know, whatnot, right? So that's the idea of learning React. Right, so in order to start developing React applications, you need to have this program called Node.js installed. If you don't know what it is, it's a runtime environment that allows you to run JavaScript on the system that is JavaScript outside the browser. Now, traditionally, JavaScript was developed and meant to be run in a browser, but here in this context, we'll be using this program to just run it from the command line as a program that's like other programs, like other programming languages like Python or or C# or Java. Anyways, you don't need to worry about those details. All you need to know is I need to have this thing installed. So what you need to do is you need to come to the website, nodejs.org, and then you download, I would recommend the LTS version because that's more stable. It's a long-term support version. It's gonna be more stable, or it tends to be, and then yeah, you'll run into less errors and so on. So you'll download this one. There's different versions for Windows or Linux or Mac, and once you download that, then we can continue with the rest of the tutorial. Okay, so once you install Node.js, then we can get started downloading the dependencies and getting started coding our first React application. So what you want to do is you want to open your terminal, and then this would be the terminal on the Mac or Linux, or the command prompt on Windows. It's all the same. And then you navigate to a folder of your choice. I'll be going to the tutorial folder that I just created on my machine. You can name it whatever you want. And then here, what you need to type in is, let me just zoom this in a bit. There we go. What you need to type in is npx create React app, and then a name that you choose for your new application. I'll call it my new boring React app. And then when I hit enter, it's going to start downloading the dependencies and then setting up our React project. Right, so after some minutes or whatever, depending on how fast your machine is, you'll see a screen like this where you'll get some text on how to run the server and so on. And then what we need to all care about is this last part, where it says we suggest you begin by typing the following, and that's to cd, you change your directory to this folder, and then you get started. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm going to type cd, and then my new boring, I can just type tab, and then it's going to type the rest. When I hit enter, now we are in this folder, and then I can just type npm start, and this is going to start our application. When I hit enter, I can come back to the browser, and if I go to localhost 3000 in a short bit, there we go. Now this is our React application, and this is the kind of the blueprint, the initial app that this create React app script just built for us. It's just for us to be able to get started and just add our code to the different files. You can see it also tells us edit the source.app.js and save to reload, and that's what we are going to do. The editor that I'm using is Visual Studio Code. You can use whatever editor that you want, but anyways, all you need to do is to just go to this folder and then open your editor of choice in that folder. I'm just gonna write code and then dot, and that's gonna open Visual Studio Code in this folder. You can also just use the user interface. It can be like file and then open folder and then open that folder. Now I'm just gonna pause the video and then apply some theme and zooming to the Visual Studio window so it's easier for you guys to read. Just hang on a second. And there we go. Now we have this large and readable Visual Studio Code version. So if we take a look at the app directory, here we see that we have our VS Code folder, which is just the folder that I just added. It's basically just defining the theme and everything. You don't need to worry about this. You will not need to add this. And then we have this folder called Node Modules. This is where the dependencies of the application are loaded into. It's all the modules that a React application relies on. And typical with these front-end frameworks and libraries, there's a lot of dependencies that are going to be installed. You don't need to worry about that. You can just now go ahead and create the first React app. If you want to dig deeper into this, the dependencies are defined in this folder in this file called package.json. This is basically in any Node.js project where you define your dependencies. You can see here we have what the create React app automatically added for us. There's these dependencies, and again, you don't need to worry about them right now. Just for you to know how the dependencies are handled in a project like this. What you need to focus on is if we come to the source folder. And then if we take a look at this app.js, this is where the body, the main component of our React application is defined. You can see here it starts with an image, which we just see here, and then it's a text that says edit the source and save to reload. Again, this is the text we see here. And then there's a learn to learn more React. Now, if I change this text, I can say, hello, I am having an amazing day. And if I hit save and I go back, you can see here we have this text now updated. And this is basically the anatomy of a React application. I can just get rid of this whole thing. I can just say I want a div, and then I want to say hello world, and hit save. And if I come back here, we have this hello world. And I can do a bit more. I can go take some pictures. Let's go to this website called Pexels, and then I can search for a, I don't know, an alpaca or whatever. And then we see this cute alpaca picture. I can just copy the image address. I can come back here, make an image tag. And if I come back to the page, we see a beautiful alpaca image. And I can just like also tell this URL to give me a smaller image. Let's make this 500, and then this one can be, I don't know, 350. And if I go back, I get a smaller image. And this is basically how a React application in its nutshell, in its very basic sense of it, is created. You have a function that defines your component. This is the JavaScript part, and then it returns an HTML that's going to render the component. And this is the kind of syntax that we call JSX. It's basically JavaScript and HTML embedded together. As you can see, if you're familiar a bit with JavaScript, this is a typical JavaScript function. It returns something, and in this case, usually in JavaScript, you can only return a value, but because this is a JSX file, it allows us to return HTML, and this is how the component is rendered. Now, I recommend you don't have to, but you can just pause now and then go and try to change these, maybe add another text, maybe add an H1 tag, and then just add another image, and then just get yourself familiar with how a React component works. Speaking of components, components are the core concept, maybe the most important concept in React. And that's why I would highly recommend you to get yourself familiar with them. It's the idea that when you have a large application like Airbnb, we have something complex with all these buttons, all these tiles, and a map and so on. You want to break it up into smaller components. And these components are basically things like this. You know, these tiles, you can see they're reused, they're all similar, but then they have a different text. And then on the map, we have these little sort of price items. They're also their own components. And then we have all these buttons. They're probably also their own components. And that's the idea, that you try to split up your application in different smaller building blocks. And the most important thing for these building blocks is that they should be reusable. You don't want to go and make these individual code one by one. That would be a lot of effort. That would be kind of reinventing the wheel. So what you want to do is you want to make a component that says, I'll give you the text rooms, and I'll give you what icon I want, and it will just render this one. And then for the next one, I'll use this blueprint to now render this one, and this one, and this one, and so on. And similarly here, you want to give it the image address and the rating and the name and so on, and then it should give you all the details. So that's basically the idea of components in React. Now there's this page called Thinking in React, where it tells you a good deal about, let me just make this light theme, where it tells you a good deal about the thought process that you need to go through when you're starting to design a React application. It tells you basically that you want to split up your app into smaller building blocks like this. For example, now we have this product table, and then it has these smaller parts, a product row, a product category row, product table, and each of these is a component. So that's basically, I hope you get the idea. Now it's getting a bit theoretical, but the idea is that you split the large application into small reusable components, building blocks or components. Now, to give you a very, very basic example, here we have our app. It says hello world, and then it has an image. Now, what I can do is I can define a separate component and call it hello world. And then here I'll just return this paragraph that says hello world. And then I can come here and then just call my component. And this is like any HTML element. You can see it's the same syntax, and you open the tag here, you close the tag here, and then it just refers to this one. If I go back to my page, you can see it's rendering exactly the same. Now the difference is that now our app is not rendering everything, it's just using this component to render this part. And I can reuse this. I can just say hello world 3 times, and you can see it's rendering it 3 times, and I didn't have to print out this paragraph every time, right? And we can make the same about the image. I'll be like making this component function cute alpaca image, and then inside here I can return this guy. I can be cute alpaca image. And if I hit save here, you can see it's now rendering the same. And now I can also just create this one 3 times, and you can see now we get this 3 times. And now, well, this is a very basic example. It's a dummy example. Of course, you wouldn't be printing the same thing 3 times. But what you would do in the real world is you would give parameters to your components. You would tell it, okay, I want you to render this thing, this text with this specific in this specific way. And that's what happens there. So if I come back here, I'll just make this image to 1. And then here, I'll just say, I want this to have an input. In the React world, we call inputs, we call them props. So I'll just say, I want a prop. I want the props here. And then here, I'll just remove this one and say, props the text. What is going on? Oh, I put 2 of these, need only 1. And now what's going to happen is for each of these times that I'm calling the component, it's going to expect a prop called text to be there. So if I write here the word text, and I want to say I want the text to be hello words, and then I can just call this hello world again. Okay, call this still hello word, whatever. And if I come back here, you can see now we get 3 different texts. And that's basically because it's taking this text and then it's inputting it into the hello world component. Maybe we can just call this a greeting component now. And then I'm just gonna come here and change the name. And now, yeah, now we have this greeting component that takes text and then shows it on the page. And this is the basic idea that you need to really try to make yourself familiar with. Again, this is a very kind of a dummy example, but the idea is that you define a component, you make give it a parameter, you define a parameter. It could be the text, it could be the style. I'm gonna show you in a moment how to sort of change the style of the component based on the parameter, and then you call that with the text and the input and the things that you want. Now, for example, for the style, and the way we do it in React is like this. We go style, and then now we put 2 curly braces, and then we can be like color is props.color. And then if I come here and say color equals blue, and if I come back here, you can see the first text is blue. And I can just repeat this one. Here I would be like, I want the green color. And then here I want the red color. Go back here, you can see now the color is changed. And now because I'm reusing this, I can do whatever. I can be like border is 1 pixel solid gray. And then if I go back, you can see now the border is applied to all these components. That's the same way that they're doing the styling here. They're saying the image, the rounded corners, the text here, it's applied to all these components. And that's how they reuse the logic to define all these. And this is just a very basic example how this kind of concept is going to be defined, and then once this becomes an industrial application, then it gets projected onto this kind of setup and this kind of more complex setup on a page. But for now, what I'm going to again recommend you is to pause the video and go and try to make something like this and try to play with this. Maybe do the background color, maybe make the text, put a boolean, and then make the text boldface or not. Just make yourself familiar with this idea that a component is basically a function that takes some input and then renders some HTML. Now, a couple of things. The way we define the style here, it might look a bit weird. This is one of the few ways to define styles in React. I think that's a more intermediate concept, so I will not go through it now. You can just, all you need to know is that styles can be defined in this way, in the most basic format of it. And then that the fact that also if you want to have something like background color, and then, I don't know, set that to black, then background color is spelled like this. It's not like -c, which you have in places in CSS, the normal CSS. You'll spell it like this when it's multiple words. And the other point would be, usually there's this recent trend that instead of the word props, you will sort of deconstruct this input parameter. What that means is that you will just remove this, and instead of the word props, you will just write the name of the props that you're using, which will be color and text. And then of course we don't need to use it here, and then we just also get rid of it here, and this should give us yes. And this, you can see it's still working and it's giving the same output. But the idea is that here you define what props you're going to be using, what input parameters you're going to be using. And this has the benefit, there's multiple benefits, and that I think the most important one is that the reader of this code, when they look at this function, they understand what it expects. And that means they understand what the function does faster, which is important, because when you work in the industry, you want your teammates, your colleagues to be able to read your code in a good way, in a fast way, and get a clear understanding of it, because that's how it's nice, and that's how you do good teamwork as software developers. And of course, if you're a bit more familiar with JavaScript, you know that in the recent sort of syntax, when I say recent, that's like the last 5-8 years or something, I think, you don't need to have when we have the same word on the two sides of an assignment, you can just remove the part to the right, and then it just is exactly the same. So if I go back, you see I'm having the same sort of text. Now, another super important concept in JavaScript is in React is the concept of states. And what state does is that it keeps track of your application and where your application is at, how it has interacted with the user, what it's showing, and so on. If we go back to the Airbnb page, you can see here we're looking at a certain part of the map, and based on this data, based on this state, which is the part of the map we're looking at, we're getting some results. Now, if I change this, if I go here, for example, you can see the state is changed now. The app is not now showing us this area, and based on that, it needs to render the other elements on the page. Now, if I, for example, go all the way down and then click on the next page, you can see now it's showing us other things, because now I change the state to go to the next page and all these things. And then if I change the filters, that's also going to be a change in the state of the application, because then it will need to show me things with a certain price and so on and so forth. And that's the concept of states. It's the idea that you keep track of where your application is at, what it's showing, and just make some sort of overall control over what it's showing. And that's a very core concept in developing a sort of reactive application like this, as opposed to this classic version where you basically have different pages and you don't really, like, the only state you have here is that which page you're at, and that's just defined by your URL. Whereas here, we don't have that. So we need to keep track of the state. And the way you do that is by coming to your React application, and then let's say, for example, here, we want to keep track of how many greeting text we are showing. And what we want to do is we say const, and then this is just a very special syntax. You just need to memorize it really. And we open the array characters, the array denomination or whatever it's called. And then we put the first one that would be the name of our state variable. We can call this number of greetings. And then I'll say set number of greetings. And then in next, I'll say it equals use state. And then the initial number, I'll be like, I want one greeting when the app starts. This is where the app starts. The value of the state would be this value. And that's basically the idea where you say, okay, now I want to keep track of this. Now, of course, like I said, a React application, the core concept is that it's interactive. And how can we add interactivity to our app? A very basic way of it would be to add a button. So I'm going to add a button here. Type is button. And then I'll call it add one more greeting. And then I want the onClick of this button to be, and then this would be a function. What the function is going to do is going to take set number of greetings, and I want this to be one more greeting than the current number. So this would be number of greetings and then plus 1. And now when I click on this button, then the greetings would increase. We would show more greetings, and that's because it calls this function, right? To show you how it's all gonna play out, let me just temporarily make a text, and I'll be saying number of greetings equals, or whatever, equals, and then I'll just put the value. And let's just maybe get rid of these for now. Now, if I go back to our app, you can see here we have add one more greeting, and then we have this number of, this is really, let me just get rid of this one for now. There we go. And you can see here, now we have this button, and then number of greetings equals 1, which is basically what this part is rendering. Now, if I click here, you can see now it adds one more to it. And if I click again, and again, and again, you can see now it's adding more and more. And that's because we have this variable here where it's keeping track of the state. When I click, it calls this function and it passes the value of the next item to it. Now, just to flex your brains a bit, if I set this, instead of the number plus 1, if I set this to, I don't know, 5, then you can see it's not going to, just set this to 5. You can see it's not going to increase it. Now, every time I click this, it just sets it to 5. And that's because, well, here I'm just telling it, I'm saying set the number and set it to 5. I can do this one times 2, and then now it's going to sort of double it every time, right? So 2, and then 4, 8, 16. And you can see that that's again how it works. And then, so that's how we sort of keep track of the state. Now, of course, we want this to give us these many greetings every time. So for that, we need to create a loop here. And that's basically a way that we tell the React application. I mean, you're probably familiar with programming. If you're not, a loop is just when you do a certain thing a certain number of times, when you repeat something, right? And in order to, let's say if the state is, if the number of greetings is 5, what I want to do is, or any other number, what I want to do is I want to open the curly braces, and this allows us to put a JavaScript code inside, and then I'll open the array sort of symbols, and this is again something you need to memorize. This is the way you put a sort of create a range in JavaScript. So number of greetings, and then keys, and then map, and then I don't need an input here. I'm just gonna use the greeting components here, and then the text, I'm going to be saying hello, you are amazing, or maybe not, because we're not very nice people here, right? Okay, cool. So now we have this thing, and if I go back here, I'm getting an error, and that's because, oh, of course, I need to close this one here. And what else is missing? Maybe this comma. There we go. And we forgot to set the color. I need to set the color here. Let's make it pink. Right, so now we can see our state is 1, and then therefore we are seeing this beautiful text once. And if I click here, it's adding 1 more. Click here, it's adding 2 more. That's because, of course, I forgot to change this one. So if I just +1, refresh the page, we click here, we get it once more, we click again, once more, and so on and so forth. And you probably kind of understand it already. Behind the scenes, what's happening is that this value is changing. Now, just to, maybe if I went a bit fast over this, what this part does is that it first creates an array of these many elements. So if this was 5, it would create an array of 5 elements, but these elements would be empty objects. And then when I call this .keys, it will turn that array into an array that goes 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now when we run this part, we have an array that's just numbers from 0 to this number -1. And we don't need to care that what the numbers are, because we're not going to use the values. All we need is an array that has these many elements. And then once you have that, you just map that to a greeting text. If you see, for example, I can just, if I try to put the value here, I can just take the value, and then instead of this text, I'll just write, making sort of another curly brace. And this is the way you put JavaScript inside HTML. Remember, we did the same here. If I put in here, if I hit save, you can see now here we have 0, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6. But then again, if you want this number, you use it. If you don't want, you don't need to use it. For example, you can see this is greeting number, and then I'm going to use n, but then if I do it like this, it's going to start from 0. So I can just say greeting number n+1, and then you can see now we get this. And if I refresh the page, now I get this value again here. And this is the basic concept of the state in JavaScript, where you have some data, some value. It could mostly think often is there a number or a string or a Boolean, and then based on that data you render something. Now traditionally, in traditional JavaScript, if you're familiar with it, you would just say upon this button is clicked, go and then add 1 more of these elements to the page. But you don't need to do that here. All you need to do is to change the number, and then what React is going to do is going to render the function again, and it's going to come here, be like, okay, now I have, this is not 1 anymore, this is 2, and then now I need to render 2 of these, right? And that's the concept that I really want you to internalize, and that's the idea that this is basically the driving force, the driving engine, so to speak, of your application. And this is where it's kind of like the single source of truth. This is where the information comes from, and based on that information, you'll be rendering different things. Same way that the information here is that we're looking at these coordinates, this part of the map of Rome, and then based on that, now it's giving us all these options, right? By the way, I'm not affiliated with any of these people. It is just an example. But yeah, I thought I just need to say that. But yeah, that's basically the concept of the states, of state in React. I highly recommend that you go now, pause the video and try to play with these. Now maybe add another state and try to do something else and so on. and then yeah, just get yourself familiar and let it kind of let it really sink, and just make sure you understand this part really well before we move on. You don't need to rush anything. Learning programming is a lot about practicing and making sure you understand the bits of it. The more of the foundations of any language or framework you understand, the more you'll be at a better place, because I mean, of course, it's like when you make a building, when you have a strong foundation, it's a lot easier to put things on top of it. This might sound silly because I'm not a construction engineer, but you get the idea. Now, one last thing for this part, if we keep adding components to the same file, our file is gonna grow and it's gonna be like spaghetti, and our team is gonna hate us, and then we're gonna get depressed and we're gonna just be really sad for the rest of our lives. So what we wanna do is we wanna put each component in its own file. Now I'm just gonna remove this one because we don't need a cute alpaca for now. Sad. And then I'm just gonna move this to its own file. By convention, you go to the source folder and then you create a new folder called components, because surprisingly, that's where you keep your components. And then you create a new file here, and then you name it the same name for your component, which would be greeting.js. And then you just take this chunk and then move it here, and then you save. Now, because this is a file in JavaScript, we need to tell JavaScript what this file is exposing to the outside world. And the way to do that here is export defaults, is saying that this file by default exports this item. The default keyword, you don't need to worry about it. It just says that the main item is this one. If you call this file without specifying what you're looking for, it will give you this one, right? As opposed to if I, for example, I could just have, I don't know, export const test equals whatever, and if I just call to this file and said I want test, it will give me this one. But if I don't say anything, it's gonna give me this one, and this is a good way to define a component in the file. I'm gonna come back here. Of course, if I just run this, it's going to complain that greeting is not defined, because we need to tell JavaScript that greeting is defined in this file. So I'm just gonna write import and then greeting. I can see it's also helping me, so just click here, and now we should, yeah, there we go. Now I can see we have the same thing, except that now our app is slightly better structured, it's cleaner. You have your app here, and then you have your greeting in this file. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is conditional rendering, and that's the idea of rendering an element based on a certain condition. For example, if you imagine we had a button here, which we're going to make in a minute, where you click on the button, this text would disappear, and then you could just toggle it to appear again. Again, something a very basic concept, but this kind of concept is going to be needed. You see it being done in different places. If we go back to Airbnb again, a lot of the things, for example, whether this search menu is open or not, this is conditional rendering. The same for these, and then you show, if I go make a filter and say I only want places with a kitchen or a Wi-Fi and so on, that's also conditional rendering, because then it would render based on the condition that all the items that is being shown are the items that have the Wi-Fi. All the listings have Wi-Fi or have a dryer or kitchen and so on. So it is, again, a core concept, but again, it's a key concept when developing interactive applications. So when I go back here, I'm gonna come back here, and then I'm going to replace this button with a toggle button. So we can, let me just get rid of this part. I'll just call this toggle message, or we can just say show or hide the messages. And then what I can do by messages, I'll be just referring to this one, and then this sort of block of all these items. Now, for the sake of this part of the tutorial, we can get rid of the array part. I can just make a single message that says, let's change this to another hello world. This is a test message, right? And then if I just make this into a empty thing so it doesn't complain, if we go back, you see here now we have this hello world. This is a test message. Now, of course, if I click on this button, is not going to do anything because we didn't define any logic for it to show or hide, right? So coming back here, the way to implement this show or hide is by implementing a Boolean, and you're probably familiar with programming a bit. If you don't, a Boolean is a type of value, is a type of variable that is basically true or false. So at any given time, it's either true or false. And that's what we're going to define here. So I'm going to say const, and then as you saw before, we first give the name of the state variable. We can call this show message, and then next one would be the function that we can use to set it to the value. So set show message, whatever. Of course, this is not correct English, I guess, but for the sake of the tutorial, I think it just suffices the purpose. So use state, and then we call this, let's say we want to show it to start with. So the initial value would be true. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call set show message, and then I'm going to take the previous value, and then I'm going to set it to the opposite of previous value. And then again, you probably know from JavaScript or Java or C++ or C# that what this exclamation mark does is it just takes this value and then it flips it. So if it's true, it'll be false, and vice versa. Now if I hit save, if I come back here, still nothing happens because when I click this one, you can see I'll just print the value here. We make a paragraph, and then we say show message here. If I go back here, what did we do wrong? Oh, of course, I think that's because it's a Boolean. So let me see, what did we do wrong? I'll just put it like this, so it can just be true or false. And then you can see now we set the value to true, so it's being printed as true. If I click here, it's going to be set to false. And what we did here is actually, I didn't really intend this, but this is also an example of conditional rendering. And what you do here is you say, take a look at this value. If it's true, render something. If it's false, don't render it. I can change this to, yes, please show the message. Or here be like, do not show the message. You, right? So then if let's refresh the page. It says, yes, please show the message, because the value is true. When I click on it, it becomes false, and then it renders the other text. And I can just click again, true, false, etc., etc. And you can see here, it says show message, and then when it's true, we show this one, and when it's not true, we show this one. And believe me, this is really this is super simple, but again, that's the power of React, that you just take super simple JavaScript and you can use it to render super complex applications. You can change this to, instead of yes, please show a message, you can change this to a paragraph or an image or something, a complex div, anything that you want to show or hide, just use it with a Boolean like this. Now, going back to the purpose of this part of the tutorial, we want to show this message only when this value is true. And the way you do that in React is you first select the whole thing and you wrap it in curly braces. And that's because now it's going to be a logic, so we don't simply render something, we want JavaScript to play here. And I'm going to write show message and then 2 ampersands. So if you know basic programming, the way this kind of logical AND operator works is it first looks at the value to the left. For example, if I write here, if let's say we define 2 variables, A is true and then B is false. And if I say A and B, and then it will do something here, what's going to happen is that the runtime will take a look at this value, and then it will see if it's true or false. If it's true, it will go on to evaluate this one, and then if B is true, of course, it's going to do something. But if B is false, it would not do it because it doesn't matter then what A is. Both of these need to be true. Now, if A is not true, it's not going to evaluate B, because if A is false, it doesn't matter what B is. It's not going to evaluate this part, right? It's not going to run this thing, right? And that's the kind of concept that applies here. If show message is true, it's going to move on and it's going to render this part. If it's not true, is going to skip this entire the content of the brackets, and basically it's not going to render what's sort of being put here. So if I go back, you can see now it's showing it because it's true. When I click here, it's going to hide, and that's because the value is false, and what I explained is taking place in action. And again, this is basically how you do conditional rendering. Of course, there could be more advanced ways of doing it, but I think this would this would be enough for a lot of the use cases that you will need to get started with React. You could just use either of these two sort of methods that I show you, in either of these two ways of doing condition rendering, and just get a bit of practice with it, get more comfortable. One last thing, I just thought I'll show you this just to give you a complete example. If I want to print something else, if show message is false, I'll change this to a question mark, and then it's like show message, yes, do this. And if it's not, then I'll just say, let me just press the right keys on my keyboard. Sorry, I am not allowed to show you the message. Notice the way the formatter in Visual Studio Code puts brackets around it. It's necessary because we're running over multiple lines. I think that's the logic, but that's just it just takes care of it automatically. You don't need to worry about it. When we go back here, you can see hello world, this is a test message, and then I click here, and now it prints the p tag. I'm not allowed to show you this message, and then when I click here again, it shows this sort of component. So we're not bound to just show a text only. We can show a whole HTML structure based on the condition. So the next thing I want to go through is list rendering. And that's because we briefly touched upon it, but I think there's some things that are important to focus on more. So I'll just go through an example that's focusing primarily on list rendering and how to handle keys and so on. For this part, we are going to make a to-do list. Very simple, very boring, but I think it's a good way to show you guys how to just get used to rendering lists in React, how to add elements, how to delete elements, and so on. And for that, I'm going to get rid of some of these items. You know what? Let's just get rid of the whole thing. Okay, and now we have a clean app, and we can also get rid of this reference. Okay, there we go. Now, what we want is basically a to-do list. We will have a list of items, and then we will have an input box where we can enter the next task to be added to the list. Now for that, let's first create these states. It will be the list of tasks, so I'll call it tasks and set tasks, and we set the initial value. Let's say we will just want a few items, so we can just say buy grocery. Is it groceries or groceries? Whatever. Wash the dishes. Say something nice to your wife, just in case. So now we have this sort of initial state. Let's add one more thing. Eat pizza with pineapple. Okay. Right, so now this is going to be the first items that are going to show up in our list. And then next thing we want to do is we want to render the list. And for that, we will use this UL element. Honestly, I forgot what it's short. I think, yeah, it's short for unordered list. And that's the way you put bullet points in HTML. Just very simple. You put a UL tag. And then for each element, you put an LI tag, which I think is short for list item. So if I put item 1 here, and if I just copy this and put item 2, when I come here, you see we have a sort of bulleted list basically rendered. Before we move forward, let me do one thing, because this is being rendered on the top left corner. I want it to be on the center of the page. For that, we can go back to our public folder and the index.html, and this is where basically we have the HTML template that's running the page. And when you come to the body tag and then this div, which is the root, this is where the element that React takes, and then it renders the app.js onto this div. So if we want the content to be shown, to be centered on the screen, what we can do is, how do we do it? Well, we actually need to just define some styles. So we can go to app.css. You see React is defining some styles for us. We don't need to worry about this for now, but what we want to do is we want to call the root, and then say, I think it's margin 0 auto, and this it doesn't do anything. I think it's because, let me just see. Okay, so what we need to do here, we need to also define the width. We can set it to 600 pixels. And now when I come back here, you can see it's being centered on the page. And then I'll just add some top position to it. Let's say we want 15% of the viewport height, and then I'll set position to relative. So the top attribute will be, it will take effect. So when I come back here, you can see the element is now centered on the page and it's easier to look at and so on. Okay, now we can go ahead and continue implementing our to-do list. And one more thing, I think we can I should technically move this to index, because it's not affecting this element per se, it's affecting its container. So I think that's just a better position to be. App.css would be to style the stuff that are on sort of inside the element, but that's just a minor thing and a matter of sort of code structure preference. Okay, so back to our list, we want to now render the items here. And to do that, as we saw, what we need to do is we need to open curly braces and then take the tasks array and then map it to the elements that will be rendering, the HTML elements that will be rendering each item of the list. So what we do here, we write task, and then for each task we would want an li tag, and then here we will just write the task. And if I come back here, you can see now we have all these items. But now we're missing something really important, and I think we will also get a warning about it. Yes, you can see here it says each child in the list should have a unique key prop, and that's because in React, every time you're doing this list rendering, you need to assign a key to each item, and that's because that's how React can detect changes on these items, and it's also a way to optimize the rendering and re-rendering of the component. But it's not just a matter of optimization, it's also to make sure that it wouldn't remove the wrong element, or it wouldn't sort of make the changes to the wrong element. And to do that, there's different ways to do this. The most simple way to do it would be to define an index here. And then so basically the way this map function works is it defines this, this sort of inner function here. The first argument, the first parameter is the element, and the next one is the index. So when it's iterating over this tasks array, when it comes here, index is 0, then it's 1, then it's 2, then it's 3. And that way we are sure that we will have a unique key value for each of the elements. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to write key, and then I can open the brackets here, and I'll just write index. And when I come back here, I can go to the console, and if I refresh, you can see the warning disappeared, and that's because now we're doing everything right. What I would do normally is, because I want to make sure, like, what if we have another type of item, another array that's being iterated upon, I'll set a sort of unique prefix for this thing here. So I'll just prepend this with task, something like this. Then we know that we're not getting like a 0 index for another something else on the page, and then this thing here. And of course, it just works the same. Now, in a real world app, you would want to use a unique ID for this, because then when you re-render, you wouldn't have the chance of running into duplicate IDs. It's a rather complicated concept. Or you would just take the ID from the server, where it would come from the database. For example, if you have a database of listings in the case of Airbnb, or if you have a database of users, I don't know, students, employees, whatever, you'll take the ID from there. But for now, for the case of simplicity, we just use the index. I think it just, if you're just learning React and landing your first job and so on, this is perfectly fine. Just maybe this, if this comes in an interview, just make sure to mention it, but otherwise this is perfectly fine for now. Right, so next thing we want to do is we want to be able to add items to the list. And to do that, we need to define an input field. Now, the way input fields work in React is that you define a state variable again, which will be kind of like the backbone of the input field. It would hold the value that the input field would be interacting with. So what we do here would be, we define a new state value, we call it new task, and then set new task, and then it will be an emptier string because we want to let the user do it. And then we come here, and then we're ready to define our input field. So we write input, and this is where you want to pay maybe a bit extra attention, because it's a bit of a kind of a syntax to memorize or get used to. So the type will be text, or whatever else you want to do, maybe month or number or phone number, whatever. And then it comes this slightly complicated part. We have the word value here, and then this will be taking the new task. And what we do here, we just tell it to take whatever value is stored in this state, and then show it on the screen. And the next thing we want to put, and this is where it gets the most complicated so far, we will put onChange, and then we take the event, the change event that the browser triggers, and then we say set new task to event.target.value. And of course we close our input tag. So what this is going to do is, if I just render this value just for the sake of this part of the tutorial, if I will just write a p tag. It's funny how I get pizza and pineapple when I put p. I'll just write a p tag and say new task, and then I'll just write new task here. When I come back here, you see I have this input field and the new task. And if I type here something, yeah, there you can see it's updating this text. And then when I remove it, the change is also reflected here. And this is the basic way you define inputs, input fields in React. It also applies to other things, like I said, like, I don't know, radio buttons, checkboxes, any type of field where the user interacts with. And this is basically form components. So yeah, that's it. Again, just get some practice with it. At the end of this part of the tutorial, when you master this part, you'll be ready to make any form in React. You could make complicated form builders, whatever, just knowing this, how you can handle interaction with the user through a form in React. So what we're going to do here, we want there to be a button that whenever we press the button, it would add the task to the list. So let's define the button, and the type is button, and the onClick value will be, let's put it, we'll define a different function here. So we call it handle add task, and then I'm just gonna, and then say add. And when I save here, we get an error message saying handle add task is not defined. So we're going to define it. I'm going to say const handle add task is, and this is the way you define a function. And inside this function, I'm going to say set, well, let's define a new array. We'll say new list of tasks is going to be, and this is, again, it gets slightly complicated. Just pay attention just to make sure you understand what's going on. We will want to take this task and then add it to the end of this array. And we want to do it in a way that we create a new array, because there's a concept in the modern UI library rendering called immutability, where you try to not use the old array objects. In our example here, you would want to create a new array object, because then it's easier for the front-end framework or library to keep track of the changes. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new array, and the first elements of this new array are going to be the elements in the tasks. So it's going to take all the tasks, and then it's going to add the new task here. And when this function is run, so we will have a new array. It will have this element, this element, this one, and this one. That would be the first part. That's what this part is going to take care of. And then it's going to take the new task and it's going to append it to the end of the array. So then I come to the next line. Of course, this is just the constant. We haven't assigned it anywhere yet. So I'm going to say set tasks. And then I'm going to say new list of tasks. And when we come back here, if I say, I don't know, test new task, and I click add, it's going to add it here. Now we want to do one more thing. We don't want the text to stay here. So afterwards, I'm going to say set new task to an empty string. And if I say test new task again, when I hit add, it's going to disappear. Now I can add something more, another new task, and it's going to just add it again. And now this is what a typical to-do list app would look like in its sort of in its basics, in its sort of fundamental level. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add the ability to remove the items, and for that we are going to add a remove button to each element, right? And for that to take place, let me see if I can add we can just add a button here. So here we have the task. I'm just going to put it in a span elements, and just so I can add another element here. We call it type is again button, and then we say remove. When we come back here, you can see, well, this looks extremely ugly, but then, well, we have this remove button for every task. Maybe we can just call this, make it the minus, right? And we can even maybe put it before the text. So yeah, and then it's like this. Now I'm going to add a bit of style here, say margin, sorry, we need another one. Margin right is going to be 1 rem. When I come back, you see now it looks a bit more, slightly less ugly, right? Half a rem. Now, okay, right. So now we have all these buttons, and we should be able to, after we implement the logic, to remove the task. Now, the way you, okay, well, let me just write the rest of the part that's going to take care of removing the button. So here we are going to write on click handle remove task, and then we just define this function here. Now, the way you handle removing items from an array in React is not by just taking the item out of the array and then letting the array be. What you want to do is, again, to create a new array that does not have this element. So it will have we want an array that has all the elements except the one that's being clicked on. And for that, we need to know what element is being removed. So inside this function, we're going to take a parameter, and that'll be the index of the item to remove. Now I'm really spelling out every part of this variable. Of course, you could just change it to index, but this is just for the sake of clarity in the tutorial. And what we want to do here is, here we're not just simply calling this function, so we need to also define a mini inline arrow function here, and inside here we're gonna pass the index. Now, instead of removing, for now, just to show you how this wiring up is going to work, we can just alert the task index, this one, and if I come back here, if I hit this one, this is task number 1. Remember the IDs start from 0, so the 0, 1, 2, 3. If I hit this one, I'm going to get 1 here. I can just hit this one. This should give me 3 here, 0, and so on. So you can see when we click the button here, it has information on which button is being clicked in the list, and that's because we put the index here. Now inside here, what I want to do, and again, I want you to pay extra attention here. I'll create this new list of tasks again, and then what's going to happen here is I'll take the tasks array, this one, and I'll filter it. And in the filter, I'll have the task and the index. And then actually we don't need the task, so we can just put in, this is just a convention, you put an underscore when you don't need a parameter, but it needs to be here because index is the second one. So if I just put index here, we'll get confused because it expects in there to be at the second position, not the first one. So we're just gonna have the index, and then I'll say I want all the elements where index is not the index of the item to remove. So all the items except the one that needs to be removed. And then I can just sort of copy paste this line, which is going to update the list of the tasks. So when I refresh here, I can just say eat pineapple with pizza. If I click here, it's going to disappear. Wash the dishes, it's going to disappear. If I say new task here, I can add it here. I can add another task. And then when I click this one, it gets removed. And this is basically the way you remove items from a list. This is a very, very typical use case. You will encounter it a lot, probably in a real job, where you need to remove items. The thing for you to keep in mind is that we do not go and use the same array. We create a new array, and that's what this filter function does. It says returns the elements. It doesn't say, it just changes it. If you're coming from a, I don't know, Python background or some of these other languages where changes to an array take in place, this is for you to remember, and it's, again, really important. It's one of the concepts that's not really obvious, but it can really bite you later on if you do it the wrong way. And that's the idea of creating a new array every time you modify the elements. Another thing I want to sort of point your attention to, and that's the this notation here. This is basically the usual sort of inequality notation, but it has 2 equal signs. So it's the exclamation mark followed by 2 equal signs. And the way we do comparison in JavaScript is basically if we want to do equality, we use 3 equal signs, and if you want to do inequality, we do 2 equal signs and exclamation mark. So just like this, equality, it would be 3 equal signs. And you can see I have this sort of font with I think it's called ligatures, where it tries to convert it to something that looks a bit nicer, but that's basically just, yeah, 3 equals. Let me just go back to the browser. If I open the sort of the console window, we get rid of this one. So the inequality would be this, and the equality would be 3 of these. That's because this way, this is a strict comparison. Then you make sure that it would actually compare the 2 values. It's just a convention in JavaScript. In other languages, in C#, Java, you would just use the double equal signs. But just for you to remember, in JavaScript, it's done like this. Yeah, you don't need to worry much more about the Y part and so on. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is the life cycle of a component and something that's called lifecycle hooks. So if you imagine a React component, it gets loaded at some point in the browser, and then at some point it gets updated. You can see here we're removing the elements, we're adding, and so on. And then the user is at some point finished with the app, and then it's going to unmount the component. In other words, we have 3 main events in the life cycle of a component. That is when it gets mounted, when it gets updated, and then when it gets unmounted. Right, and that's what I'm gonna show you in a bit. It's what I'm gonna show you now. It's basically very simple concept when you understand it. Well, it's very simple concept when you just take a look at it and play with it for maybe just a bit. The way it works is, let's say I wanna show an alert and say hello to the user every time this function, this component is loaded. What you would do in that case is you will say use effect, and this is something that's called a hook. In React, it's just a way to define the way the component acts on these different lifecycle events. And inside here, you define whatever you want to write. So I'm just gonna say hello, welcome to this super boring app, right? I can see here, now we came back here, it just showed us this thing right away. And that's because what happens here is that this lifecycle hook gets called the moment the component is mounted. You can see here, if I refresh the page, it gets shown here. But there's one thing we're missing here, and that's the event that triggers this hook. Right now, we haven't defined that, so it's going to be called every time the component is being re-rendered, and we don't want that. What we want to do here is we want to come here and then define an empty array. Again, this is a really conventional way of doing things. It's not really self-explanatory, and this is where you need to just accept the fact that this is how it's done. What this empty array means is that there's no dependencies for this hook. So it's only going to be called when the app is mounted. Notice that if I put this here, it's going to be called every time the function, the app is being re-rendered, because every time it's re-rendered, it's going to sort of go through all these steps and interact with them. Whereas when it's being written here, it's only going to be called the first time the app is mounted or loaded. So when I'm just gonna refresh here. Let's open a new tab. You can see it gets called, and it gets called again. Okay, I just looked it up. It's because we have something called strict mode enabled in this index.js. We can just sort of remove it for now. You don't need to worry much more about it in details. But now we can see when we refresh the page, it gets called once, and then we see this alert only once. And if I just interact with the page here, if I write test and so on, it doesn't get called again. And that's because here we define an empty array. We said there's no dependency, and we want this to be run only on the beginning, only when the component is loaded. Now, for example, if let's say for the sake of it, I'll just add I'll add tasks here. And when I come back here, of course, we need to put it down after it's being defined. So now you can say we get the alert once, and if I remove something, we get it again. And then if I add another task, we get it again. And that's because here I said that tasks is a dependency upon which I want to run this code, whatever code comes inside here. And that's basically the way you interact with the different lifecycle hooks. We can then put other things. We can be like, whenever you type in a text here, do something. Of course, I don't think you would use that in a lifecycle hook a lot, but the official React documentation has a good example here. If you want to make a chat room, you want to connect, and connecting to a server is a very typical use case. In a moment, I'm going to show you how to get some weather data from an API, and that's a very typical use case for UseEffect, because you don't want to do that every time, right? You want to do it only when certain things change. If we go back to Airbnb, you can see it's loading some stuff here, and if I search, let's say this time I want to go to whatever, Lisbon. If I do a search here, it gets it loads certain elements here, and if I do like a zoom out, now it's using this as a dependency, as in calling the API again, and that's what you want to do. You don't want it to call the API every time. Like when I'm scrolling down, you don't want it to call the API. You only want it to do it on certain events, which is here zooming out or zooming in or setting some filters, and that's what the hook allows us to do. So here you can see they have this chat room, and what they do is they take the room ID, and then when that changes, they're going to connect to the server with that room ID, and then they're going to connect. Again, you don't need to understand what this connection is doing. This is just an example to show you that this is some sort of thing you would do when you're dealing with lifecycle hooks. This is a practical example of practical application of lifecycle hooks. You can see here, then it connects, and now the front end is connected to the chat room, and then when it's done, it's going to disconnect, and the way that's done is you just return a function from UseEffect. Again, this is a complicated logic. Honestly, I think there would be a better way to structure this, but that's what they came up with, and then you just return whatever you want to run when the component is unmounted, and then you have the dependency here. So when room ID changes, it's going to call this again. Yeah, so just to recap, this part is run when room ID changes, and then when the whole component is unmounted, when the user navigates away, you're going to write this part, which is being returned from the component, from the UseEffect. All right, so the next thing I want to show you is how to get data from an API. An API is basically, it's short for application programming interface, and that's basically a way to say a server, a backend, some server sitting somewhere out in the world, or your own server, and you want to show that data to the user. It's a very, very, very typical use case when developing front-end applications, and yeah, so that's what we're going to go through. For that, there's a website called Rapid API. It's a good website where you can explore different APIs and just play with them, see how you can use them, and so on. And the one I'm going to use is called Yahoo Weather. What you would do is you would just search for an API, you search for whatever you want, and then whatever you're looking for, and then you're gonna see a list of options. I was playing with this Yahoo Weather API a bit, and it looked good for this example, this tutorial. And then once you come here, you want to look at the pricing. You want to make sure they offer a free plan or whatever sort of fits your needs. And then you can see here they have this sort of free plan for only 100 requests per month, which is enough for us for this case. So we're gonna come back here, and then it would, because I've done it before, it's going to ask you to log in or subscribe to be able to test. Of course, you need to log into the whole Rapid API sort of platform as well. And then once you're done with that, you can see it shows you how to connect to the API and just use it, right? So what we want to do is we want to take a look at the JavaScript example using fetch. Fetch is basically this function that's defined in sort of the more recent JavaScript versions. It's supported by modern browsers, easy way to get data from an API endpoint. You can see the endpoint is something like this. It's like an URL that you would type in your browser, except that it's meant to be communicated from a machine, from another piece of code, which is in this case our front-end React application. And then you sort of authenticate using an API key. And then yeah, you write usually some other sort of other stuff there as well. Now, the good thing is we can just take this whole code and then copy paste it into our app and then see how it works. And you can see here, there's the API here, and then it just takes a location. We can change it to whatever, Paris. You can see now we just change it to Paris and then just some other stuff. So yeah, we're now ready to copy this code. So I'm just gonna select it and then copy, Control C. And then when I come back here, I want to get this data when the application is loaded, and I want to get that once. So I'll just first remove the to-do app stuff. Let's just remove everything. And then what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna write use effect, and then I'm just gonna paste this code here. Of course, you want to make this, maybe move this to a different file or different function at least, but now for the sake of the tutorial, we're gonna keep it here. And then of course what you want to do, and this is really important, is to put this empty array here, because that's the way we tell use effect to run only once. We don't want it to run on each render. As you saw, it's only 100 requests per month that we get, so it's really important to make sure this is run only once and upon loading the app. And then one more thing, this is a sort of a JavaScript specific syntax where we have this await function. I think we have it in other languages as well. But when you put the await, you need to put async in your function definition. That's just the way the JavaScript syntax works. What it's going to do is going to sort of come here, and then it's going to wait for this function to be returned. I think then it's going to release the processor so it can go and do some other things while this function is loading, so it doesn't hug the processor, and that's the sort of way to improve the performance. So now we're ready, and then once you see here, we have this console log. It's going to show us the data that's being returned. What I'm going to do is, instead of logging the results, I'm going to put a debugger here. And this is also for you, it's a good thing to get used to in JavaScript. You can write the word debugger, and then when you go to the browser, if I open this console tag, now we're getting some error, but basically when you have the debugger, it's going to stop here and then show you what you have. I don't know what's going on here. Let me just refresh. It was just a temporary example. And you can see here, now it's stopped at the debugger. And if I sort of expand this part, you can see now we have the result that says that you're not subscribed. So I'm going to, you can see here, it just says that I'm not subscribed to this API. I'm just going to pause the video and subscribe in a second. Okay, so I just subscribed through the Rapid API website, and if I refresh, and now we see that we get some results here. Look at this, we have a result string. This is in a JSON format, so I can just copy string as JSON literal. Let's go back here. And of course we get this sort of stringified JSON. But you see here, we get some data here. Let me just clean this up. There's probably a better way to do this, but I'll just clean it up and then say I want all these to be unescaped. And then when I hit save, I can just come here and say JSON. And you can see now we get the content of our response here. This is basically how the response is going to look like. We get the location information, and then we get all the forecasts. So Sunday is going to be this sort of temperature, Monday, Tuesday, and I think these are Fahrenheit. Honestly, I have no idea how high is 55. I'm not used to Fahrenheit, but that's basically the data that we get. I'm gonna come back here, and then I think for units we just can set it to Celsius like this, and now this should give us the right data. Okay. Next thing we want to do is we want to ensure that we get the response as JSON, and that's I think this is just the example that came. We can just change this one to give us JSON. The way it works is it's just fetching the data, and then it creates a buffer, and then when you call this line, then it just takes that and then just parses it as JSON. So I'm just going to come back here, and if I do a refresh, and now you can see we get a proper JSON object that we can just browse in place here. We don't need to go and just put it in VS Code and so on. You can see we get the location. And what else do we get? We only get the location. Oh yeah. And then we get the forecasts. It was hidden under that popover. Location, current observation. We have all this data. There's 3 degrees Celsius. It's fair. And then we have some forecasts. Now I wouldn't go through these just to show them. We will just show the current condition. So what we're going to look at is these 2 variables here, the atmosphere and the condition. I'm just going to take this and sort of copy paste it into VS Code. Oh, this doesn't look very nice. Okay, but then all we need to do is if we call results.currentObservation.condition.temperature, and this is just something you have to work it out. Not very pretty, but that's just working with APIs. You need to just get used to reading the data the way they give it to you, which is again fine. So again, we're going to call result.currentObservation.condition.temperature, and then we're going to get the temperature in Celsius. So what I'm going to do here, I am going to, let's say we define a state value called weather. So we just say current weather and then set weather, and then we say use state, and we make this an object. Inside this object we want to have the temperature, let's say just initial value, we can call this undefined, condition, empty string, and yeah, let's go with these 2 for now. And then what you would want here is you want to set weather, and then we come back here, we see its results, that current observation. This is really ugly, by the way. You don't need to worry about it the way it looks, but it's going to be result, current observation, condition, temperature. So the temperature is going to be result, the current. I'm just going to copy paste all these. And condition dot temperature. And then inside here, we are going to write temperature, and then I'm just going to use weather dot temperature degrees Celsius. I'm just lazy to look up how to put the degrees symbol, so I'll just do it like this. And if we go back here and if we refresh the page, you can see we get temperature 3 degrees Celsius. And now, as you saw, it took a short half a second before this value was shown, and that's because that's the time it takes to connect to the API and get the data from the API. Now, that doesn't look really nice. We don't want the user to think we have no data to show. Imagine maybe you would be on a sort of mobile 3G network that's not very well. You always need to think about all these things when you develop front-end applications. The worst case scenario, maybe you're in some mountains, and we don't want the user to see empty values for a long time. And instead of that, what we can do is that we can just define a loading text. So I'm just gonna cut this and then say that if there's no temperature, we want to show something else. So what we want to do here is we want to say whether the temperature, if it's there, we're going to show this one. If it's not there, we're going to show loading. And 3 dots. And if I come back here, you can see now it shows loading, and then it shows the right value. Now, in a lot of cases, this part would be fine. But there's a little caveat here, and that's the fact that this value could be 0, and in JavaScript, if a value is 0, it'll be treated as a false, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to write this. If it's not undefined, then we will just do this, and then if it's undefined, we will just put loading. And I'm just gonna refresh. And now you can see, now we get a beautiful loading symbol. And then I can of course go and then use the sort of write the condition as well. So I think it was called condition. I closed the file, fortunately. So I'll just write condition. We just go whether that condition, and then yeah, it's just a condition like this. What is missing here? Okay, it's telling us that we need to only have one parent element, what I told you before. So I'm just gonna cut this and wrap it in a fragment. So now you can see we have this sort of text that shows temperature is this much degrees Celsius, and the condition is the condition. Now I'm just gonna go back and make sure the value is set on the state. So I'm gonna write condition is result dot current observation dot condition dot, I don't think it was called condition, right? Sorry. So let's see. Let's go back, see what it was called. We put a debugger here, and I need to open the debugger doesn't work if you don't have the dev tools open here. Okay, there we go. And now we see it's called result condition text. Sorry, so it's called text. And then we can just take a look at atmosphere, humidity, and so on. So we can just add that as well. So I'm just gonna call this text, and then humidity, and then I'm just gonna call this atmosphere that humidity. And then we just call humidity. It gave us the one with a small h, and then just gonna put the percentage sign, and then weather that humidity, and then we can just add humidity here as well, undefined, and then I'm just gonna remove the debugger as well. If I come back, refresh, you can see now we get all the stuff. Now I'm, I guess, tired, so I'll just put this in the wrong place. When I come back here, you can see now we get all the sort of the right values here. The temperature in Paris is 3 degrees Celsius right now. is partly cloudy with an 86%. I think this is percent. I'm not sure what's the unit. I'm not a weather expert, but this is the data that we get here. Now you can just take this and go on and make a beautiful weather website just like this. Just take the data from an API and then yeah, just show it on the screen. Well, there's different ways, but then you can see as long as we have this result object, we have access to all these things that the API gives us, and then we can show them on the screen. That's basically what you'll be doing as a front-end developer. You would get this object from the backend, and then you will just show the values. There's a few things, there's a few enhancements we can do. We can, if you see here, we're only taking a look at the temperature. We can use a second state variable. And this is also something you would do often, is use something, we can call it loading, and then set loading, use state, and then it's, of course, it's going to be true because when the application starts, it's going to be loading. And then here, instead of this condition, I'm just going to say if it's loading, and then I'm going to flip these around. So we want to have it like this. So if it's loading, I want it to show loading. If it's not loading, if it's finished loading, I want it to do this. And of course, I have to update the value of loading once we're done here. So you set the weather and then you say set loading to false. If I come back here, you can see it works. I was getting a bit worried that there was something wrong, but now it works. And this is how you get data from APIs, and that's how you show them. Just a quick recap, what we're doing here, we have this use effect. It's being run when the first time the component is loaded, and that's because we have this empty array here. So once the component is loaded, it's going to define the URL. It's going to send the GET request to this URL to the API. It says I want the weather for Paris. I want it in a JSON format, and I want the unit to be the Celsius. And that's what we basically took from the documentation here. It kind of made this for us basically, and that's just how APIs work. They have different parameters, and you just need to read their documentation and know what they expect you to do. Then you have the API key, and then this is the host that I guess it expects as well. And then once it's done defining them, it's going to send the request to the URL with these options. That's just how this fetch function works. And then it's going to take the result, and then it's going to assign the values to the state. Put them on the state, right? So it's going to update the state with the values, and once the state is updated, the app is going to be rendered again, and this part is going to be rendered again, and instead of loading, it's going to show these because now loading is false, and we have all these values here, and that's how you're going to make an app that uses an API. All right, so the next thing I want to show you guys is how to work with forms in React. That's also something that you will come across in your job a lot, where you need to make different forms for where the user enters some data and then submits it to the server and the system. Now, forms in React follow very closely the structure of forms in HTML, which is something like this, where you have the form tag, and then here you specify where it would send the form to, like what page you will open after the form is submitted, and then that's the page where it will send the data to as well. And then you define some label here. You see it's called, there's a first name, and then you define the input field, which we briefly touched upon. And then you just put as many input fields as you want, and then there'll be a submit button. This could be either a button or an input that's called type submit. It works the same way. And then once the user clicks here, the data would be sent to this address. Now, we're not going to send our data anywhere, but we're gonna go through how to make a form on the page and how to show errors and so on. Right, and for that, I'm going to remove the code that we have written so far. And also, let's remove this one. Let's make sure this app file is just basic one. And I'm also going to remove our greetings component and make a new one called form.js. It could be called anything, basically. We just call it form.js. And then we write export default function form. And then just temporarily, I'm going to write here is the form. And hit save. And then I can come back here and then I'll just render the form inside the div. And it doesn't know where it's gonna come from, so I'm just gonna write import form from components form. And if I come back here to our app, there we see here we have our form. Yeah, just a quick recap. We have the form object being used here, and then it just points to basically this component. Now we're ready to start making our form. And for that, as we saw here on this W3 schools page, we need a form tag. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to return a form tag. Now, inside this form tag, we will ask for a name and an email address. So I'll just simplify it. We will usually put some label, but for the sake of simplicity, I'll just use a placeholder. So this would be called input, and the type is the text because this is the name. And then we put placeholder, enter your name, and then we just call it, that's it, right? And then I'm gonna create another one for the email. This one would be of type email, and then enter your email. And at the bottom, we are going to have a button. And this time it would be of type submit, because we want this to be submitting the form. As you saw the previous examples, the button was just doing stuff, adding items to the to-do list and so on. And that's where you put the type button, because when you put the type button, then when you click the button, it just calls the function that you defined. Whereas if you have the submit type inside a form, it's going to submit the entire form. And that's what we want here. So I'm gonna call this submit. And if we come back here, we will have this kind of, yeah, not very good looking form actually. Let's style this a bit. I think it's because it's applying a flex style on the form. I don't know why they're being queued up. You know what, we can just change this. So we just call this a style. We can say display is going to be flex. Flex direction is going to be column. And then we want a bit of vertical gap between the items. So I'm just going to put the gap to 1 rem. We come back here. Now we see it's being rendered like this, but then they're being really stretched. And this is, by the way, totally optional. I'm just writing this so it looks nicer. We will then write align items, and then it would be start, so flex starts. We come back here, now we see we have a nice form with enough spacing in between. It's easy for the user to use, and so on. And I'm just gonna also zoom in on this page so it's easier for you guys to see. Now, if I enter stuff here and I click submit, of course, nothing is going to happen because we haven't done any of the wiring around. We haven't bound this to a state variable. We haven't defined what should happen on submit. And that's what I'm going to do here. By the way, just for an example, just so you see how forms work, if I put an action here and set it to Google, it's definitely not going to work, but just want to say let's say we put it like this, and if I click submit, it's going to come to this address, right? And usually what you do is you'll have a post request where you just submit your data to this address. A post request is a request where is an HTTP request where you put some data, and then you carry that data and you send it to the endpoint that you define here. Normally you will just have some local address from your server, for example, I don't know, new user, whatever, but for the sake of this tutorial, we're not going to submit the form. We're not going to send it anywhere. We're just going to work on the page. So I'm going to remove this part. Next thing we want to do is we want to handle the submit event. And for that, we are going to make a onSubmit callback on the form, right? So I'm going to call onSubmit. And I want to call this function that we're going to define in a moment called handle submit. So let's say we are ready to define our handle submit function. So handle submit, yeah, it's an inline function. And all we want to do here, we want to say, put an alert to say form submitted. Yay. Right. And then if I come back here, let's put an address here again. So action, I'll just put it to test, whatever. And let's say usually you will have a post method, because the post method has the ability to carry a good amount of data, whereas if you make it a get request, it's gonna put the data on the URL, which is limited, I think, to 200 something, 250 characters and so on. So you want to make sure your method is post. If I refresh here and I hit submit, it's going to show this one. And then when I click OK, it's going to come to this endpoint. And we don't want that. We want to stay on the page. And for that, I'll need to pass in the, I'll need to get the reference to the event that's being passed here, and that's the event of the user submitting the form. And what I want to do here, I want to write event.prevent default. This is basically how it works also in traditional, if you can say, JavaScript. When you have an event that's naturally emitted by an action, if you don't want that to take place, you just call event.prevent default. And for example, in this case, it's going to not send us to this test endpoint here. So if I click submit here, we're going to see the alert. Good, but we're not going anywhere. And this is what we want now, because we are just practicing and working on this page. Right. And next thing we want to do, we want to connect these input fields to a state. And for that, we define, as we saw before, we define an state variable. So I'm going to call this name, set name, and then use state like this, and then email, set email, another use state, also empty string. Then we come here, we say our value is going to be name, and I'll change. We are going to take the event and then give it to set name, and there we're going to call event the target.value. Save, and we just need to basically follow the same syntax for email. So I just copy paste it, and I'm going to write email and also set email. Right, and of course we don't have a way to see it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to alert these two values just so we see how they look like. And for that, we're going to use this template literal syntax. It's basically these backticks, and then inside you write like this, name, and then email. And then to use the variable here, it's a bit of a weird syntax. You put a $sign and then curly braces again, and then you put name, and you do the same for email. Right, and so this is basically just gonna write name, and then it's gonna take the name and display it, and then email, and then gonna display the email. So refresh here, let's say I put John Doe, and then test@test.com. When I click submit, you see I see the values here. That means it's registered and it's working. And if I change here, put a 2, if I click submit, it's gonna show it here as well. So far so good. And this is basically, I think so far we covered maybe 80% of what it takes to build a form. All you have to do is define the inputs, and then you connect each of them, you bind them to a state, to a corresponding state. value or variable, and then once you submit, you're going to do something here. Maybe you will, in most cases, you will have an endpoint by the back end of the application that you're working on, and then you'll make a call to that endpoint. But here in our case, we're just working on a front end, and I think that's also something that you should maybe take a look in later. I think it's not really in the essential scope, but what I would like you guys to do is to just go and practice, and then add more fields, maybe add a date field, add a number field, and then when you say submit, you just make sure they're all being set there, and then yeah, maybe you can add some interactivity. If, for example, if the number is a certain country code, just write the country code, like things like that, right? The idea is to focus on how to build interactivity around this area. Again, if we go back to Airbnb, again, I'm not really affiliated with Airbnb. This is just because I think it's a very good and straightforward example. You see here, we have, these are also form fields, right? I can come and type here, and then there's a great deal of interactivity here. You see, as I start typing, it's gonna show the suggestion list, and then when I type further, it's gonna narrow that down, and then it's the same for dates. If I, for example, pick a check-in date, I cannot pick a check-out date that's before. You see, when I click here, if I go before it, it's gonna update check-in. If I go here, it's gonna update checkout, right? And that's the idea, because you wanna help your user as much as possible, because that means the user is gonna like your website, they're gonna come back, and basically your website or app or business is going to grow this way. So the most important thing is to build a good amount of good interactivity that's easy for the user to do here. Now, I'll show you a couple of simple enhancements here. The first thing we want to do is, again, this is also optional. It's a bit of a matter of taste, but let's just take a look at it so you're also familiar with this way of sort of building a form. It's not much different from what we have here. Is the idea that if you add a lot of input fields, let's say even if you have 5 or 6, it's going to take a lot of take many lines, and then for each of them you have to sort of call this, and then it might get a bit messy. So what you would want to do is you'll define a form data value, so we can just call it form data, and then set form data. Notice that this is always what you put here. The next one is just called set. That's by convention. Then it's easier for you to track the code and see what you have available. And then inside here, we are going to use an object as our initial state. And then it's going to be name. And then it's going to be email. And then what we do here, you see it already sort of crossed this out for us. Value would be just form data.name, because now this is an object and it has a name property, and that's what we need to use. And ironically, didn't cross this one out, so I'm just gonna call form data.email. And now it's gonna take the values and correctly display them, but on change is not correct anymore because we don't have any set name and we don't have any set email. Now for this, what we would want to do is we want to define a single function that's going to that we can call from each of these, right? For that we need to well, let me first define a function. I'll call the function handle change, and then we will have an event as the input. Notice that on a lot of these handle functions, you would want to take the event because you want to know what happened, right? And then I'm going to call set form data. And here where it gets a bit tricky, I want to take, let's say if we change the name, I want to take the email there as well. But I don't want to explicitly call email. So what I want to do is I want to take the existing form data, and then I want to say whatever that was changed, now change it here. And for that is we just need to say event target.name, and then we say event target.value. And this is, because you can see here, this targeted name is a new thing here. It does not refer to the name here yet. This could also be email. And this is basically the way we know what happened. This one would be telling us, like the way I do square braces here, it means that it's going to be a variable. It's going to set the variable to this value. It's not going to be fixed as opposed to here. That's how it works in JavaScript syntax. And for that, I need to define the names here, because then I want to tell this function, okay, what was it that was changed? So let's change this name to email, to name. And then I'm going to call this a email. And then let me also add one more, because I want to show you guys how this is done. Let's add a phone number. So I'm just going to write phone number. And then we just make another input. I think the type is tell. It doesn't, I think on desktop browsers it doesn't make a difference, but on the phone it makes a change, I think. But this is basically the correct type for it. And then the name, we call it phone. You can see now we added these name attributes, and what it does is basically it identifies this this input field to the code. It says this is a name field, this is the email, this is the phone. I don't know, if you had first name, last name, then it would be first name and then last name and so on. But that's basically, this is something that we define. It's not a system string. It's just something that we arbitrarily say that we want to call this email, we want to call the name, we want to call this email, we want to call this phone, etc., etc. Now, last thing I want to do here, I need to say on change. Now, notice how it's going to be a lot simpler. It's going to be just handle change. We just copy paste this one here and also here. And I hit save. It's going to rearrange them. Now, so what's going to happen is it's going to call onChange, and then it's going to come to this function, and then it's going to say set form data. Let's say if I change the phone, it's going to take the existing values. That's all the 3 existing values, and it's going to override the phone to the value that I set it to. And this is how we kind of simplify, instead of writing 3 different state variables, we simplify the way we do it. Again, this is totally optional, but it's for you to just get an idea how things can be a bit simplified, so the code is easier to read and so on. And of course, the last thing we want to do here, we want to call this now from form data, and then we also want to phone form data dot phone. Okay, now when we come back here, refresh the page, John Doe test. Of course, I think we forgot to bind. Yeah, of course we forgot to bind this one, right? So I guess now we have John Doe test at sign.test.com, and then 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4. Now when I hit submit here, I get the correct values. As you can see now, it's basically this function here working for us. It has updated the values, and then when I hit submit, the form data object has the correct values. So just a quick recap, what we did is we define a function here that can work on any input field. If you have 10 input fields, 20 input fields, it works the same. It takes the name of the field that was changed, namely the phone or the email or the name itself, and then it sets it to the value. And then all we need to do is we just call this function on change on each of these input fields. Now the other and the last modification I want to show you guys is, again, something that you will do a lot when you make forms, and that's validation. Because you want to tell the user if they did something wrong, you want them to be able to fix it before they send the form, because then they fix it earlier and then they're happier. If the user sends everything and then gets a response back from the server, I don't know, 1 second later, 2 seconds later, that says something is wrong, that's not going to, they're not going to like it, because then yeah, it's not a very good user experience. So for that, what we want to do here is that we want to define an error field. Yeah, let's put it this way. So we're gonna define a new state variable called error and set error. and then we just call use state, and of course in the beginning error is going to be an empty string. Now what I'm gonna do here is I want to show the error above the button if there's an error, and for that I'm gonna write error and then 2 ampersands, and then I'm just gonna write the error. Notice that if we don't put this one, it's going to show this this empty paragraph all the time. We don't want that. We don't want the error to be shown only when there's an error. And then I'm just gonna make a style and then make this color to red. And yeah, if we come back here, of course nothing has changed because we haven't set any error. Now what I want to do here is that when the user clicks the submit button, I want to show an error if any of these fields is empty. And for that, what we want to do, let me just get rid of this alert. What I want to do is I want to say if there's value on all the fields, namely if this form data that name is there, if form data that email is there, and if form data that phone is there, then I want to alert everything is good. And if it's not the case, then I want to set the error to please fill in all the fields. And of course, if everything is good, if the user makes doesn't fill out one of the fields, and if they fill them out all together and submit, then I don't want to show the error anymore. So I'm just gonna say set error to an empty string again, right? We come back here. Let's say I put the name, and I put the email, but I don't put the phone number, and I hit submit. You see I get this this error message here. Of course, it's a bit big and obnoxious now, but that's fine. We just want to see how it works. So then you see I get this one, and if I put the phone number when I hit submit, I'm not gonna get this one anymore, right? And if I then remove this one and hit submit, I get it again. Then something you want to do here, you could just move this logic to the handle change, so it will be upon every change. So then every time it would change, the user would type in something, then it would show an error. But then that gets a bit complicated because you don't want to show an error with the first time they open the form, because when the first time they open the form, of course, all the fields are going to be empty. They need to work with things like on focus or on focus out or those kind of events where they get triggered when the user leaves this input field, which again, I think maybe it's better if you guys go and practice it yourself, because yeah, that's a bit outside the scope of the essential things in React, in my opinion. I think what you would want to do is here just expand on this example, and then try with more more fields. Try to then catch if, for example, tell the user what they're missing. If email is missing, tell them email is missing, and so on. And that's basically the that was it about the forms. A minor thing, in React there's two types of components when it comes to components that take the user input. There is controlled components and there's uncontrolled components. If you come across it in some literature or some tutorial on the internet, then you know. What we are doing here is a controlled component, because we have this state that controls what's being displayed in the form, right? This is here, we have the value, and then it basically is controlled by this one. There's also the uncontrolled way, which is the more traditional JavaScript. We just say if the form is updated, now run this function that goes and updates the value and so on, whatever. We don't need to focus on that now. I think actually for the sake of just for you to learn the basics, this is the pattern that you want to follow, that every time you have an input field, you want to have it bound to a state variable like this, or an individual variable like name or email and so on. Right, and that was it, guys. That was the tutorial. I hope you learned some good stuff here. Again, I try to not confuse you with a lot of details or a lot of sort of more intermediate or more advanced topics. And that's why, because I think it's really important when you're learning software development to have this philosophy of, I want to have a solid, strong foundation of the basic things, and then I'm going to work on the more intermediate or more advanced topics. And that's why I would highly encourage you to now go and experiment with these, try to make modifications, add some field, remove some field, go back through the other examples, try to look up how to do different things, and then really take the time to make sure all the knowledge settles, and then that you're comfortable with all these things, that if you want to start from scratch and build another application like a calculator or a more advanced to-do list or something, that you're able to do it without much help, right? And that's it. If you have any comment or feedback, I would more than appreciate to have it, of course, positive or negative. But anyways, thank you very much for watching and listening, and I'll see you in the next video.